Imagine being put on trial by the entire galaxy, only you don't even know it's happening. In a chamber so vast it could swallow a city, thousands of alien species gathered, each one a mystery to humankind. In the middle of it all, a giant of a man, Ambassador Zexi of the Kron Empire, rose to his feet. Standing nearly 10 feet tall with skin like polished steel and glowing red eyes, his voice boomed like an avalanche. "Esteemed members," he declared, "the mighty Kron Empire is bringing a new world into the fold. The planet is called Earth, and its people will serve us." A tidal wave of whispers crashed through the hall. This was an injustice on a cosmic scale, a powerful empire targeting a species that was just a baby on the galactic stage. What happens when the galaxy's biggest bully picks on the new kid? Stick around, because you won't believe humanity's response. The first to object was Velara, an ancient ambassador whose wisdom was legendary. "Have you lost your senses?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. Zexi just laughed, a horrible sound like grinding rocks. "You're just old and afraid, Velara. Humans are pathetic. They're a young, feeble species. They've only been flying between stars for 100 years, while we've done it for millennia." Then, a scarred old warrior, General Thra, stood up. "You're a fool, Kron," he growled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. We've watched them since they first left their planet. They're different." Zexi scoffed. "Different? They're fragile creatures of flesh and water. Their ships are toys and their weapons are primitive. How could they possibly be different?" That's when Ambassador Q, the oldest and most respected being in the room, slowly got up. When he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. "Young Kron," his voice was like the whisper of wind through ancient ruins. "I've seen empires far greater than yours crumble because they underestimated the weak. And the humans, they unnerve me, not because of their strength, but because of how they think." Zexi waved his hand dismissively. "Fairy tales from old men. The Kron Empire has conquered 47 star systems. We've never lost. These humans will be just one more easy win." "But have you actually studied them?" asked Dr. Zillith, a scientist whose voice was pure melody. "Their history, their wars, their unique approach to problem solving." "I've seen all I need to," Zexi snapped. "They bicker over tiny patches of dirt. Their weapons are based on simple chemistry. They have no unity. They'll fold the moment we show up." The hall exploded into a chaotic symphony of voices as hundreds of aliens began arguing at once. Some were trying to warn the Kron. Others were already planning to steer clear of human space, fearing the fallout. Velara called for silence. When the noise settled, she tried again. "Zexi, we are begging you not to make a catastrophic error. They might seem weak, but they possess something that terrifies anyone who's paid attention." "And what might that be?" Zexi sneered. "They never quit," General Thra said, his voice low and serious. "In all our observations, we've never seen humanity as a whole except defeat. They lose battles, but they always find a way to win the war." "And they adapt," added Dr. Zillith, "faster than any species on record. Give them an impossible problem, and they'll invent 10 different solutions, none of which you'd ever see coming." "They sacrifice," Ambassador Q said with a deep sadness. "They will lay down their lives not just for their species, but for an idea. Their definition of an acceptable loss is completely alien to us." Zexi scanned the room, seeing nothing but worried faces. It only made him angrier. "You're all cowards," he roared. "The Kron Empire fears no one. In 6 months, we will return with Earth conquered and its people in chains. Then you'll all see how ridiculous your fears were." "Ambassador," Velara pleaded one last time, "I urge you, reconsider. talk to them. There has to be another way." "The time for talk is over," Zexy shot back. "The decision is made. Earth is ours." With that, he turned and stormed out, his arrogant delegation marching right behind him. A heavy silence hung in the air. Finally, General Thra broke it. "Should we send them a warning?" Ambassador Q shook his ancient head. "They'll find out soon enough. And when they do," he paused, a profound weariness in his eyes, "I'm afraid we're all about to learn what happens when you corner the one species in the galaxy that sees war not as a tool of politics, but as a fight for the very right to exist." As the council members left, they weren't just thinking about the crone. They were thinking about humanity, and many of them began quietly plotting how to be on the right side of history when the dust settled. Back on Earth, the Crone's message arrived 3 weeks later. President Chen read the ultimatum in her Geneva office for the 3rd time. The words were brutally simple: surrender or be annihilated. 6 months, she whispered to the empty room. "They're giving us 6 months." She calmly pressed a button on her desk, and her chief of staff's face appeared on a screen. "Martha," President Chen said, her voice steady as a rock, "activate Protocol 7. Martha's face turned white. Protocol 7 was a ghost, a 50-year-old emergency plan from when humanity first discovered it wasn't alone. "Are you absolutely certain, Madam President?" Martha whispered. "Absolutely. Send the codes out on the quantum channels. Every colony, every military base, every deep space station. I want every human alive to get this message within the hour." The screen went dark. President Chen looked out her window at the peaceful city, at the people living their lives, completely unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. The change was immediate and invisible. Far beyond Neptune, an asteroid the size of a mountain suddenly cracked open, revealing a massive, hidden military station. Similar stations blinked to life across the entire solar system, all disguised as boring mining outposts. On humanity's most distant colony, Kepler 442b, Governor Hassan was eating breakfast with his family when the message came. He kissed his wife and kids goodbye, walked into his office, and activated a hand scanner that had been gathering dust for 2 decades. Deep beneath the planet's surface, colossal machines, whose existence was the stuff of myth, roared to life. Aboard a tiny research vessel near the Vega system, Captain Torres was in the middle of a stellar survey when her comms officer burst onto the bridge. "Captain," the young man panted, "Priority 1 message from Earth Command. Protocol 7 is a go." A chill ran down Captain Torres's spine. "Confirm it," she ordered. "Already did, ma'am. Quantum comms, fully encrypted." She looked at her small crew of 15 scientists, all staring at her with wide eyes. None of them knew their little science ship was secretly packing enough firepower to crack a planet. "All hands," Torres's voice rang through the ship. "Listen up. As of right now, this is no longer a research vessel. We are now the United Earth Expeditionary Ship Retribution, and we have a job to do." Meanwhile, deep inside a bunker under the Rocky Mountains, General Morrison watched a holographic map of the galaxy light up. Thousands of green dots, each one a human ship or colony, spread across 37 star systems. "Sir," his aide reported, "all assets have confirmed receipt of Protocol 7. All sleeper protocols are now active." General Morrison gave a grim nod. "Time frame? We'll be fully mobilized in 6 weeks, sir, but our first line of defense will be ready in 72 hours. "Excellent. Signal the colonies. Tell them to begin Phase 1. All across human-controlled space, a secret was revealed. Harmless-looking mining freighters exposed hidden missile batteries. Civilian transports opened their cargo bays to reveal fleets of fighter craft. What everyone thought were research stations bristled with plasma cannons. But the greatest surprise wasn't the technology. It was the people. On Mars, factories instantly switched from making tractors to building tanks. On Titan, ice harvesters started producing a supercoolant that could neutralize Kron energy shields. And on Europa, underwater fish farms were converted overnight into shipyards, churning out swarms of small, lightning-fast attack drones. This wasn't chaos, this was a plan. Imagine planning your entire civilization for a single, terrible day. Every city built with a secret military purpose. Every shipping lane designed to be a supply line. Every single person trained to be a soldier. That was humanity's secret. Dr. Sarah Kim was a brilliant physicist on Proxima Centauri b, until the moment Protocol 7 went live. Instantly, her team dropped their research on particle acceleration and began building the deadliest bomb their species had ever conceived. They'd had the blueprints ready for 30 years, just waiting. "How soon will it be operational?" her assistant asked, his voice trembling slightly. 4 months, Dr. Kim answered, her eyes fixed on the device. "Maybe faster if we ditch the safety checks." "Should we?" "Yes," she said without a moment's hesitation. "We ditch them." Miles away in the asteroid belt, a miner named Jackson Smith got the Protocol 7 alert right in the middle of his lunch break. He glanced around this mess hall at his crew of 23. These guys were his family. They'd been cracking rocks together for 15 years. But now, everything was about to change. "All right, fellas," he said, setting a sandwich down. "You all remember that mandatory military training we had to take to get this gig?" The crew exchanged nervous glances and nodded. Every person who left Earth for a job in space had to go through it. Most figured it was just a precaution for things like equipment failure or the odd pirate raid. "Well," Jackson said with a grim smile, "turns out it wasn't for pirates." 2 weeks later, Jackson's repurposed mining freighter was patrolling the far reaches of the solar system, equipped with weapons that could tear through advanced alien battleships like they were tin cans. But the transformation wasn't just about guns and ships. Human society itself was remade in an instant. From Earth, President Chen delivered an address to all 12 billion of her people. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice calm and steady, "we are on the verge of facing our greatest trial. An alien empire, known as the Kron, sees us as a primitive, weak species. They believe we'll roll over and surrender. They are dead wrong." She paused, her gaze piercing through the camera. "For 50 years, ever since we discovered we weren't alone in the cosmos, we have been getting ready for this, not hoping for it, not wanting it, but preparing. Every colony, every station, and every ship was built with a singular mission: to ensure that anyone who comes for us will live to regret it for eternity." Across the galaxy, humanity stopped and listened as one. "We will not surrender," President Chen declared, her voice rising. "We will not offer terms. We will not fall back. We will teach the galaxy what happens when you threaten the children of Earth." The moment her speech concluded, humanity went to work. Not just soldiers, but teachers, farmers, engineers, and artists. Everyone had a part to play. The Kron thought they were about to swat a bothersome fly, a young race that had just barely figured out space travel. What they were actually facing was a civilization that had spent half a century turning every town into a fortress, every person into a warrior, and every piece of technology into a weapon. In 6 months, the Kron Armada would reach Earth, expecting an easy conquest. What they would find instead was something the galaxy had never witnessed before: an entire species that had collectively decided to make an example out of anyone foolish enough to pick a fight with them. Admiral Krexar of the Kron Third Fleet was brimming with confidence as his ships neared the outer human colonies. He was in command of 300 warships, the most powerful fleet the Kron Empire had ever launched. His vessels were state-of-the-art, and his warriors had never tasted defeat. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we're approaching the Kepler 442 system. Our long-range scans detect minimal defenses. Looks like maybe 20 small ships." Admiral Krexar grinned, revealing a row of sharp metallic teeth. 20 ships against his 300. This was going to be a slaughter. What the admiral couldn't possibly know was that those 20 ships were counting on his arrogance. From the bridge of her flagship, the UES Defiance, Captain Sarah Martinez watched the enemy approach. Her ships were tiny compared to the Kron behemoths, but they were designed for one job: to inflict as much pain as possible before they went down. "All right, everyone," Captain Martinez broadcast to her small fleet. "You know the mission. Make them bleed for every inch of this system." The Kron fleet warped in, arranging themselves in a flawless, intimidating formation. Their ships moved with the precision of a victory parade, a display of power designed to terrify the humans into submission. Unfortunately for them, it just made them a really nice, neat target. "Sir," the Kron sensor tech reported, a note of confusion in his voice, "the human ships aren't running. They're charging us." Admiral Krexar let out a hearty laugh. "Foolish primitives. Eager to meet their end, are they? Fine by me. All ships, fire at will as soon as you have a lock." The Kron fleet unleashed a torrent of energy, brilliant lances of destruction streaking through the void. But the tiny human ships didn't fire back. Instead, they did something so insane, so utterly alien, that the Kron couldn't comprehend it. 3 of the human ships suddenly shot forward at impossible speeds, aiming directly for the largest battleship in the Kron fleet. Kron weapons tore through their hulls, ripping them to shreds, but they didn't slow down. They just kept coming, even as they were being torn apart piece by piece. "What in the stars are they doing?" Admiral Krexar roared. He found out a second later when the first human ship, now little more than a fiery wreck, slammed into his flagship. The impact was catastrophic, ripping through both vessels. The second ship hit a moment later, and then the third. When the blinding flash faded, the mighty Kron flagship was gone, disintegrated into a cloud of debris. "Admiral!" the communications officer shrieked. "The humans! They just destroyed the Vengeance!" But that was just the opening act. The rest of the human fleet scattered, employing tactics that defied all known military doctrine. They weren't trying to win a battle, they were just trying to cause chaos. Human ships would pop out from behind asteroids to launch nuclear-tipped missiles. When Kron vessels closed in, human captains would overload their own reactors, turning their ships into massive bombs to take the enemy with them. Captain Rodriguez was in command of one of the smallest ships, a converted freighter with a crew of only 8. When 3 Kron destroyers boxed him in, he knew there was no escape. "To the crew," he said over the comms, his voice steady, "it has been a profound honor." Rodriguez pointed the nose of his ship at the nearest destroyer and slammed the engines to maximum. The Kron threw everything they had at him, but it was too late. His ship, packed with high-grade mining explosives, struck the destroyer, and both vessels vanished in a silent, brilliant fireball. The battle raged for 6 agonizing hours. By the end, the entire human defense fleet was annihilated. All 20 ships and their crews were gone. But they had taken 57 Kron warships with them, including the fleet's flagship. No species in the history of the galaxy had ever inflicted those kinds of losses. Admiral Krexar's second-in-command, a grim officer named Thexel, found himself in charge of the shattered fleet. He stared out at the floating wreckage, trying to process the nightmare he had just witnessed. "Sir," his tactical officer said, his voice barely a whisper, "the humans. They fought like demons. They never even considered retreating. They just kept fighting until their ships blew up around them. Commander Thexel was a veteran of countless wars, but he'd never seen anything remotely like this. Most races surrendered when the odds were stacked against them. Others would fall back to preserve their forces. These humans did neither. They fought to the last man, and they seemed determined to drag as many Krone down with them as they could. "Send a report to High Command," Thexel ordered. "Inform them that the Kepler 442 system is ours," but the cost was staggering. What he didn't put in the report was the look of pure terror he now saw on the faces of his crew. News of the battle spread like a virus through the Krone fleet. Warriors who had expected an easy conquest were now whispering fearfully about the strange suicidal creatures they were facing. And this was just the beginning. At Wolf 359, a single human space station held off an entire attack fleet for 3 days straight. When the station's defenses were finally breached, the humans took 12 Krone ships with them. They had rigged their own reactors to detonate, waiting until the enemy ships were close enough to be vaporized in the blast. At Gliese 667c, human colonists abandoned their cities, but not before setting off charges that bathed their entire world in lethal radiation. The Krone conquered a planet so poisoned it would be uninhabitable for centuries. But the biggest shock came at Ross 128. The Krone arrived expecting a tiny research outpost. What they found was a heavily armed military base, cleverly disguised as a civilian science station. The humans there unleashed weapons the Krone had never even imagined, railguns that fired solid slugs at near-light speed, biological agents that targeted Krone DNA. And most terrifying of all were the human soldiers themselves, who fought with a ferocity that was completely unnerving. When Krone forces landed, they expected the humans to fight conventionally from fortified positions. Instead, the humans launched relentless attacks using psychological warfare. Snipers would take a single, devastating shot and then vanish. Booby traps would detonate in areas the Krone thought were secure. Some human soldiers would even fake a surrender, only to activate hidden explosives when the Krone came to take them prisoner. General Vexloth, the Krone commander on Ross 128, sent a panicked message to Fleet Command. It was a message that would send shockwaves through the entire empire. He said the humans, they don't fight to win land. They fight to wipe us out. They seem to care more about destroying our forces than they do about their own lives. After just 1 month, the mighty Krone Empire had captured a few human colonies, but the cost was staggering. They'd lost nearly 200 ships and thousands of soldiers. And what was worse, the other species across the galaxy were watching. They were learning that the unstoppable Krone could bleed. Back on the Krone homeworld, Emperor Krexel read the reports in his palace, his disbelief turning to rage. "These losses are unacceptable," he roared at his war council. "How can these primitives be causing so much damage?" His chief admiral chose his words carefully. "My emperor, the humans fight like no one we've ever faced. They seem willing to accept any losses as long as they take us with them." The emperor's eyes narrowed. "Then we will teach them the true cost of defiance," he declared. "Prepare the second and third armadas. We will strike their homeworld directly. When Earth burns, the rest of them will fall in line." The admiral hesitated. "Are you sure that's wise, my emperor? Perhaps we should try to negotiate." "Never!" the emperor bellowed. "The Krone do not negotiate with primitives. Ready the fleets. We attack Earth in 2 months." As the Krone amassed the largest fleet in their history, whispers of humanity's supposed madness spread through the galaxy. Other species began to wonder if they had misjudged these newcomers. But deep within human territory, hidden away in secret bunkers and orbital shipyards, something far more dangerous than madness was waking up. The Kron thought they had seen the worst humanity had to offer. They were about to be proven terrifyingly wrong. Emperor Krexel stood on the bridge of his personal dreadnought, the Eternal Conquest, watching the largest fleet in Kron history power up for their jump to the Sol system. 500 warships, including 12 colossal dreadnoughts, with the Emperor himself leading the charge. This was every major ship the Kron Empire could pull from its duties. "My Emperor," Admiral Vakshan reported, "our scouts confirm human defenses are minimal, a few space stations, some patrol craft, nothing that should give us any trouble." The Emperor's red eyes glowed with smug satisfaction. "Excellent. Once we turn Earth to glass, the other colonies will see how pointless it is to resist." But what the Emperor didn't know was that human scouts had been shadowing his fleet since the moment it left Kron space. Every single maneuver, every change in formation, every tactical discussion was being recorded and beamed back to Earth. And in a hidden bunker buried deep beneath the planet's surface, General Morrison watched the enemy fleet approach on his holographic map. All around him, dozens of officers managed stations linked to every single human military asset in the solar system. "Status report," Morrison commanded. "All defensive platforms are online," an officer replied. "The asteroid fortifications are armed and ready. Mars orbital cannons are fully charged. All sleeper ships have activated their combat protocols." Morrison gave a grim nod. "And the special projects?" he asked. "Project Mjolnir is ready for deployment. Project Prometheus completed its final tests yesterday. And Project Pandora—" The officer paused. "General, are we really going to use Pandora?" Morrison stared at the 500 red icons creeping toward his home. "If they want to threaten Earth," he said, his voice cold as ice, "they're about to find out why that was a very big mistake. Activate all projects." Across the entire solar system, things that had been dormant for 50 years began to stir. Asteroids cracked open, revealing massive weapons platforms. Space stations that looked like simple research outposts suddenly bristled with missile launchers. Even the moon itself opened up, unveiling gun batteries that could tear a battleship in half. But the real surprise was the ships. The Kron had detected about 30 human vessels. What their sensors missed were the 300 warships hiding in the asteroid belt, powered down and waiting silently. And these weren't the tiny ships the Kron had fought before. These were state-of-the-art warships, built in secret and armed with weapons designed for one purpose: to kill Kron. Captain Lisa Park stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, humanity's newest and most lethal warship. Her ship was smaller than a Kron dreadnought, but it carried a weapon that could literally tear a hole in the fabric of space. Then, the order came from Fleet Command. "All ships, the Kron are entering the outer system. Begin Phase 1. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came as the Kron fleet passed Neptune. Their sensors picked up a tiny research station. Admiral Vakshan, annoyed by the distraction, sent a single destroyer to check it out. The destroyer never sent back a report. Instead, the research station revealed itself to be a weapons platform that fired a projectile at nearly the speed of light. The Kron destroyer was ripped apart so fast, it just vanished. "What happened to the Seeker?" the Emperor demanded. "Unknown, my Emperor. It just ceased to exist." More surprises were waiting. As the Kron pushed deeper, they discovered that every planet, every moon, every major asteroid had been transformed into a fortress. Jupiter's moons launched swarms of missiles that moved faster than anything the Kron had ever seen. Saturn's rings turned out to be a hiding place for thousands of tiny attack drones. But the biggest shock came when they reached the asteroid belt. "Sir," the Kron sensor operator said, his voice trembling, I'm detecting massive energy signatures all through the field. It's like the asteroids themselves are powering up. Emperor Krexel watched in horror as hundreds of asteroids revealed themselves to be hollowed-out shells, hiding human warships and weapons platforms. The asteroid belt had become the largest military base in the history of the galaxy. "Impossible," he whispered. "How could they hide all of this?" Admiral Vakshan was wondering the same thing when the humans finally attacked. The entire asteroid belt erupted with weapons fire, beams of energy that sliced through Krone armor like paper, missiles that could track a ship across millions of kilometers, and strangest of all, projectiles that seemed to warp space as they flew. The lead Krone ships were obliterated so quickly that the rest of the fleet couldn't even react. In the first 30 seconds of the battle, humanity destroyed 50 Krone vessels without losing a single ship of their own. "All ships return fire," the Emperor screamed. The Krone fleet started shooting back, but their enemies were everywhere and nowhere at once. Human ships would dart out from behind an asteroid, unleash a devastating volley, and then vanish. The humans weren't fighting a battle, they were conducting a hunt. Captain Park's ship, the Vengeance, locked onto the largest Krone dreadnought and fired its special weapon. Space itself seemed to twist as the projectile shot toward its target. When it hit, the dreadnought didn't just explode, it folded in on itself and then simply disappeared. "What in the stars was that?" Admiral Vakshan yelled. His science officer's voice was filled with pure terror. "Sir, I think they just weaponized a black hole." The battle raged for hours, but it wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The Krone had the numbers, but the humans had turned their home into one giant weapon. Every rock became a bullet. Every planet became a cannon. They were even using the sun, firing arrays that focused solar energy into beams of pure destruction. What truly horrified the Krone was how the humans fought. When a human ship was critically damaged, the crew didn't try to escape. They floored the accelerator, aimed for the nearest Krone ship, and detonated their reactor. One Krone captain watched in disbelief as a human ship, its entire front section blown away, kept fighting. The human crew, exposed to the vacuum of space, stayed at their posts, firing their weapons until they suffocated. "They're insane," the Krone captain whispered. "They fight like demons." But they weren't insane. They were desperate, and they had been preparing for 50 years for this very moment. Every single human knew that if they lost this fight, their species was finished. So they fought with absolutely everything they had. The turning point came when Emperor Krexel himself was forced to run. His personal dreadnought, the pride of the entire Krone fleet, was being hunted by a pack of human ships that moved like wolves. They had already crippled his escort vessels and were closing in for the kill. "My Emperor," Admiral Vakshan pleaded, "we have to withdraw. We've lost over half the fleet." The Emperor stared at his tactical map, which was littered with the wreckage of hundreds of his ships. The humans had lost ships too, but not nearly as many. And worse, more human vessels just kept appearing from hidden bases all over the system. "Retreat," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Then, louder, "All ships, retreat!" The remains of the Krone fleet fled the Sol system, leaving behind nearly 300 destroyed warships and thousands of dead. The greatest military force the galaxy had ever known had been utterly shattered by a people who turned their entire home into a weapon. As the last enemy ship vanished into hyperspace, General Morrison allowed himself a small, tired smile. But he knew this wasn't over. The Krone would be back, and next time, they'd be ready. "Status report," he ordered. "We lost 47 ships and 6 major installations," came the reply. "Casualty reports are still coming in, but it looks like about 12,000 dead." Morrison gave a solemn nod. 12,000 humans gave their lives to defend our world, but in doing so they saved Earth and sent a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity was no one's punching bag. How did our special projects perform? He asked. Mjolnir was a complete success. Prometheus performed even better than we'd hoped. The officer hesitated. And Pandora, sir, we never had to activate Pandora. Good, Morrison said. Keep it on ice for the next time. All across the galaxy, the news of the Krone Empire's defeat was spreading like a shockwave. The most feared military in the known universe had been utterly shattered by a species most considered little more than primitives. Panic erupted in the Galactic Council. Trade routes were redrawn overnight to steer clear of former Krone territory, and some civilizations quickly started trying to get friendly with humanity, wanting to be on the right side of history. But hidden deep beneath the Earth's surface, humanity wasn't celebrating. They were already planning their next move. This battle was won, but the war was a long way from over. The Krone would be back for revenge, and this time they'd likely bring friends. Humanity was fine with that. They'd spent 50 years getting ready for just one war. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Council was pure chaos, a scene unlike any in its long history. Delegates from over 200 species shouted over one another in the Grand Hall, a noisy mess of fear, rage, and utter confusion. At the heart of the storm sat the handful of surviving Krone officials, their usual arrogance gone, replaced by the empty, haunted stares of the defeated. Ambassador Valara of the Archelon Union finally managed to bring some order. Her ancient voice cut through the noise, commanding the respect of beings who had lived for thousands of years. "We are gathered here," she declared, "to listen to testimony about the events in the Sol system. The Krone Empire has suffered what can only be described as a complete military collapse. We must understand how this was even possible." Emperor Krexel wasn't there to answer. His remains had been found scattered among the debris of his flagship, along with nearly his entire command staff. The acting Krone representative was Admiral Thakor, one of the few high-ranking officers who had made it out alive. The admiral got to his feet slowly, his metallic body dented and scarred, his glowing red eyes now dim. When he finally spoke, his voice was just a faint, raspy whisper. "Honored Council," he began, "I was in command of the Krone 4th Battle Group during the attack on Earth. What I saw there, what those humans did, it breaks every rule we thought we knew about warfare." The entire hall went silent. Even races that had always despised the Krone leaned in, desperate to hear. "The humans weaponized their entire solar system," Thakor went on. "Every single asteroid, every moon, every chunk of space junk was either a hidden gun platform or a camouflaged ship." He paused, his hands trembling at the memory, but that wasn't the horrifying part. The worst part was the way they fought. They weren't fighting to win territory or to seize resources. They were fighting to make absolutely sure we could never be a threat to them ever again. I saw human pilots continue firing even after their cockpits were breached and they had no air left to breathe. I watched them crash simple cargo ships into our mightiest dreadnoughts. I saw them overload the reactors of their own space stations, turning them into massive bombs just to take our ships with them. Dr. Zilth from the Science Collective asked in a quiet tone, "What was their acceptable casualty rate?" "There was no rate," Thakor replied, his voice cracking. "They fought as if every last human life was expendable. So long as it meant they could hurt us, we would obliterate entire human bases, and instead of surrendering, they would rig their reactors to detonate and drag our fleet down with them." General Thrax of the Hegemony, who had tried to warn the Krone about this months ago, just shook his scarred head. "How many ships did you lose?" 437, Thakor answered. Out of 500, a wave of stunned gasps swept across the assembly. The greatest fleet ever assembled in galactic history had been all but wiped out. But that's not what truly terrifies me, the Corps added. The most terrifying thing is that they were holding back. What are you talking about? Ambassador Valara demanded. Our intelligence teams analyzed the human weaponry. A lot of it was clearly experimental, stuff they seemed to have been saving for a moment just like this. But during the final hours of the battle, our sensors picked up energy signatures, readings that pointed to even stronger weapons that they never deployed. Commander Kexel, another Kron survivor, shakily stood. I was there when we intercepted some of their communications. One of their commanders reported that something called Project Pandora was ready to go, but they were ordered to stand down. And what, Dr. Zilth asked, is Project Pandora? We have no idea, Commander Kexel admitted, but based on the energy signature, we believe it was powerful enough to shatter entire planets. The hall exploded into a frenzy of panicked whispers. The thought that humans possessed planet-killing weapons and chose not to use them was somehow far more frightening than if they had actually unleashed them. Ambassador Ku of the Vorthak, the oldest being in the council, slowly pushed himself up from his chair. At over 1,000 years old, he had watched dozens of empires rise and fall. I have a question for our Kron colleagues, he said, his voice like the rustling of ancient leaves. During this conflict, did a single human ship or outpost ever try to surrender? The surviving Kron officers exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Admiral Thakor answered, no, not a single one. Even when their situation was completely hopeless, even when they were outnumbered 100 to 1, they just kept fighting. Some of their ships were still shooting at us, even as they were blowing apart. And did any of their colonies try to negotiate after your fleet first arrived? No, the admiral said softly. They evacuated all the civilians they could, then turned their own cities into death traps. When our troops landed, we discovered they had rigged entire planets to self-destruct. Ambassador Q nodded slowly. Then you have finally learned the lesson we tried to teach you months ago. Humans do not think like we do. They don't fight wars for strategic advantage or to force a better treaty. They fight wars to ensure their enemy ceases to exist. The ancient alien scanned the chamber, his old eyes looking at the terrified faces of delegates from hundreds of different worlds. What you have witnessed, Q continued, is the result of attacking a species that has spent 50 years preparing for the day someone might try to wipe them out. Every human colony, every human ship, every piece of their technology was built for a single purpose: to make any attacker deeply regret their choice. Dr. Xylith voiced the question on everyone's mind. So are the humans a threat to the rest of us now? Before a single person could respond, the massive doors to the chamber swung open. A lone figure walked in, dressed in the simple blue uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. It was Ambassador Sarah Chen, President Chen's own daughter and the very first human to ever set foot in the Galactic Council. A dead silence fell over the hall as she walked to the center of the room. Her presence was a strange mix of calming and absolutely terrifying. She looked so young, so harmless, yet everyone knew she was the face of the species that had just annihilated the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Honored representatives, Ambassador Chen said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. I'm not here today as a conqueror. I'm here because I want to make sure a tragedy like this never happens again. She turned her gaze directly to the surviving Kron officers. The Kron Empire attacked my people because they saw us as weak. They assumed we would simply roll over and surrender. They were mistaken. And now thousands of soldiers on both sides have paid the price for that mistake. She then turned to face the entire assembly. Humanity has no desire to be your enemy. We want to be your trading partners, to learn from you, and to explore this amazing galaxy alongside you. But I need to be perfectly clear about one thing. What happened in the Sol system is exactly what will happen to any other species that threatens Earth or its colonies. The chamber was so quiet you could hear a pin drop as she continued. We are not an aggressive people by nature, but we are completely and utterly ruthless when it comes to defending ourselves. Every human settlement is a fortress. Every human ship is a potential weapon. And every single human citizen is trained to resist an invasion. Ambassador Chen paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. The Kron learned this lesson the hard way, at the cost of their entire fleet. I truly hope no one else feels the need to learn it for themselves. She started to leave, but then stopped and glanced back at the delegates. Oh, and one last thing. I'm sure you've heard rumors that humanity has weapons we chose not to use in this war. Those rumors are true. We held back because our goal was to send a message, not to commit genocide. But if anyone else decides they want to try their luck, she gave a small shrug. Well, let's just say we might not be so restrained next time. After she was gone, the hall was silent for several long minutes. Finally, Ambassador Valara broke the silence. I move that we immediately draft and ratify the Terra Accords. A galaxy-wide treaty, she explained, declaring that Earth and all human-controlled space are permanently off-limits to any and all military action. Seconded, General Thrax shouted immediately. Thirded, Dr. Zillith added. In less than an hour, every single species in the Council had signed the agreement. Earth and its colonies were officially declared neutral territory, not because of some newfound respect for human rights, but out of pure, unadulterated terror of what humanity was capable of if truly pushed. The Kron Empire crumbled within 6 months. Its remaining colonies either fought for independence or were quickly swallowed up by their neighbors. The Emperor's home world now serves as a monument to the foolishness of underestimating humanity. And across the galaxy, a new saying found its way into hundreds of different languages. Never, ever attack Earth. Have you ever heard a story that's told to kids to keep them in line, but is also whispered between generals before a battle? It's about us, about humanity. And it starts with the biggest mistake the Kron Empire ever made. They picked a fight with people who just wanted to be left alone. They saw us as an easy target, a peaceful species that wouldn't fight back. They were wrong, and the story of how wrong they were is one for the ages. Stick around, because you need to hear how one act of injustice turned the galaxy's biggest underdogs into its most respected power. It all started when the Kron burned our outer colonies. We're not talking about military outposts. We're talking about farms, homes, families. They sent a message that they were the predators, and we were the prey. For a while, the galaxy watched, expecting us to crumble. But then a strange thing happened. We didn't just fight back, we transformed. Every single human, from diplomats to delivery drivers, became part of a single, unified war machine. It wasn't about anger. It was a cold, calculated fury. The Kron expected a fleet, but they got something they couldn't comprehend. 100 billion people all working with terrible, perfect efficiency to erase them from existence. That was the big reveal, the secret weapon humanity had been hiding. It wasn't a ship or a bomb. It was our unity. The Kron Empire, with all its power, simply shattered against the unbreakable will of a species that had decided together that they would never be victims again. In the end, we didn't just win the war. We won a new kind of peace. A peace guaranteed by the chilling memory of what we're capable of when we're pushed too far. The lesson was simple, and it echoed through the galaxy forever. Attacking humanity is suicide.